You feel like you're choosing your life. Right now, in this moment, it feels like everything begins with you. Every thought feels personal. Every decision feels immediate. Every direction feels like it's yours to take. You believe you are standing at the beginning of each choice, but you're not. Something has already moved before you even become aware of it. Look closely, not at what you decide, but at how fast it happens. A thought appears, and it already feels formed. A reaction rises, and it already feels certain. A desire pulls, and it already feels like it belongs to you. There is no clear beginning, no visible moment where you truly started, and yet you still call it your choice. Why? Why do your decisions feel so familiar, even when the situation is new? Why do you keep returning to the same patterns, even when you promise yourself you won't? Why does it feel like something inside you already knows what you're going to do before you do it? The Vedas do not try to convince you of anything. They simply point to what is already happening. Silently, continuously, beneath your awareness. You are not choosing in the moment. You are arriving at a choice that has already begun. Before the thought reaches you, it has already taken shape. Before the feeling feels like yours, it has already started moving. Before you say, "This is what I choose," something deeper has already leaned you in that direction. And what you call control may only be the final echo of a process you never saw begin. This is not a belief. This is not an idea. This is something you can see, if you are willing to look without rushing. Because the moment you truly see it, the way you understand your mind, your choices, your entire life, will quietly, completely change. The choice is already moving before you become aware. You believe the moment of decision is where everything begins. You think that when you say yes or no, when you choose one path over another, that is the starting point. It feels immediate. It feels personal. It feels like it is happening right now, in your hands. But the deeper truth does not reveal itself so quickly. It waits until you are quiet enough to notice what has already happened before you arrive. By the time you become aware of a choice, the movement has already started inside you. Not loudly, not in a way that demands attention. It begins in a place you rarely look. A thought appears in your mind, and it feels like you created it in that very moment. It feels fresh, like it belongs to you, but you did not see where it came from. You did not see the small shifts in your mood that shaped it. You did not notice how a memory, barely remembered, leaned your mind in a certain direction. You did not see how something you heard yesterday, or something you felt long ago, quietly moved beneath the surface and arranged this moment before you even noticed it. There is a whole process unfolding inside you, but it happens without asking for your permission. It happens without announcing itself. It moves in silence. And then, at the very end of that movement, you become aware, and in that instant, you believe you are the one who started it. It is like arriving at the end of a long conversation and believing you heard the whole story. You only heard the final sentence. The tone is already set. The meaning is already formed. The direction is already decided. But because you arrived at the last moment, you think you were there from the beginning. Your awareness catches the surface, not the depth. You stand at the edge of your mind, watching the final result of something much deeper, and you call it your decision. But the real beginning did not happen where you are looking. It happened quietly, far below your attention, in layers you do not usually see. Tiny influences, almost invisible, began to gather. Old impressions, long forgotten, began to stir. Emotions shifted slightly, just enough to change your direction. And all of this happened before you became aware that anything was happening at all. By the time the thought reached you, it was already shaped. By the time the choice appeared, it was already leaning somewhere. And by the time you said, "This is what I choose," the path had already been set in motion. This is why some decisions feel so easy. This is why certain reactions feel automatic. This is why, even when you try to choose differently, you often end up in the same place. Because you are not standing at the beginning of the process. You are standing at the end of it. And when you only see the end, it is easy to believe you are in control. But control would require seeing the whole movement, not just the final moment. not just the visible part, but everything that led to it. And until you begin to notice that deeper movement, your choices will continue to feel like yours, while quietly following a direction that was already decided before you even became aware of it. The mind does not create. It quietly repeats what it knows. You believe your mind is creating something new every moment. You feel your thoughts forming, shifting, moving in different directions, and it seems like something original is happening inside you. It feels alive. It feels creative. It feels like it belongs to you. But if you slow down, not to analyze, not to force anything, just to watch carefully, a different truth begins to appear. The mind is not creating in the way you think it is. It is remembering. It is repeating. It is reshaping what it already knows into something that feels new, but is not truly new. Every thought that appears in your mind carries a trace of something that has already been experienced. A word you once heard, a feeling you once felt, a reaction you once had, a belief you picked up without even noticing. All of these remain inside you, not as clear memories, but as subtle impressions. And these impressions do not stay still. They move, they combine, they reshape themselves, and when they rise into your awareness, they appear as a fresh thought. But they are not fresh. They are familiar in disguise. This is why your thinking follows patterns you rarely question. You react to situations in ways that feel predictable. You are drawn to certain choices again and again, even when you believe you are choosing freely. Because the mind is not starting from zero. It is always starting from what it already knows. It is like a river that keeps flowing through the same path. It may look slightly different each time. The water changes, the surface shifts, but the direction remains the same. The path was already formed long ago, and now, everything that flows through it simply follows that path. In the same way, your mind moves through paths created by past experiences. And because these paths feel natural, you do not question them. You trust them, you follow them, and you call them your thoughts. But the Vedic insight is quiet and clear. What you call thinking is often just repetition in motion. The mind takes what it has seen before and presents it again. It takes what it has felt before and recreates that feeling in a new moment. It takes what it has believed before and strengthens that belief through repetition. And because this process is smooth, because it happens without effort, because it feels so close to you, you never stop to ask where it is coming from. You assume it is you. But what if it is not? What if it is simply a movement of memory, flowing through you again and again? This is why change feels difficult. Not because you cannot choose differently, but because the mind keeps returning to what it already knows. It seeks familiarity. It seeks repetition, even when that repetition brings discomfort, even when it leads you back to the same place. The mind does not ask, "Is this right?" It asks, "Is this known?" And if it is known, it follows. So when you say, "This is how I think," you are often describing a pattern that has been repeated so many times that it feels like truth. But it is not truth. It is memory continuing itself. And until you see this clearly, every thought will feel like a new beginning, while quietly carrying the weight of everything that has already happened inside you. The mind will keep repeating what it knows, and you will keep believing it is creating something new until you begin to watch it, not as your identity, but as a movement that has been repeating itself long before you ever noticed it. Your past is still deciding. You're just arriving late. You think your past is behind you, something that happened, something you remember when you choose to remember, something that no longer has real power in the present moment. It feels distant. It feels finished. But the deeper truth is much quieter and much closer than you expect. Your past is not over. It has not stayed where it happened. It has moved forward with you, not as clear memories you can see, but as subtle impressions you rarely notice. Every experience you have lived through has left something inside you. Every moment of fear, every moment of pleasure, every moment of rejection, every moment of approval. None of it disappeared. It all settled into you, quietly, without asking for your attention. And over time, these impressions became the lens through which you now see everything. So when a new situation appears in your life, you are not meeting it freshly. You are meeting it through everything you have already been. Before you even become aware of what is happening, your past begins to respond. It recognizes patterns. It compares what is happening now with what has happened before. It sends signals, small, almost invisible signals, guiding your reaction. A slight hesitation, a sudden attraction, an unexplainable discomfort, a familiar sense of comfort. All of this happens before you consciously decide anything. And then, a moment later, your awareness arrives. You look at the situation and think, now I will choose what to do. But by that time, something has already leaned you in a direction. Something has already shaped your response. You are not standing at the beginning of the decision. You are stepping into a process that has already started without you. This is why certain reactions feel automatic, why you sometimes respond in ways you later question, why you feel pulled toward the same kinds of people, the same kinds of situations, the same kinds of outcomes, even when you try to change. It is not random. It is not new. It is your past, still active, still moving, still deciding quietly beneath your awareness. It does not force you. It does not control you loudly. It simply guides you, gently, consistently, almost invisibly. And because you do not see it, you believe the movement is yours. It is like walking into a river and thinking you are choosing the direction of the flow. But the current was already there. You simply stepped into it. In the same way, every moment you call a choice is already touched by everything you have lived before. Your past is not something you visit. It is something you are still living through. And because it feels so natural, so close, so familiar, you never question its presence. You only feel the result, and you call that result your decision. But the Vedic insight does not ask you to reject your past. It asks you to see it clearly, to recognize that what you experience as a fresh moment is often shaped by something much older, something already in motion. And when you begin to see this, a quiet understanding begins to form. You are not starting your life in each moment. You are continuing it. You are stepping into a flow that has been moving long before your awareness arrives. And until you begin to notice that movement, you will keep arriving at your choices late, believing you are deciding, while something deeper has already decided before you got there. What you can't see is guiding you, and you call it freedom. Freedom feels obvious. It feels like something you already have. You wake up, you think, you choose, you act. No one is forcing you. No one is standing in front of you, telling you what to do. So it feels natural to believe that you are free, that your life is moving because you are moving it. But the deeper truth does not reveal itself through what is visible. It reveals itself through what you are not seeing, because what guides you the most is not what is loud. It is what is silent. It is what operates without asking for your attention. You don't see how your environment shapes your thinking. You don't see how the people around you slowly influence what feels normal. You don't see how repeated experiences create invisible boundaries around your choices. You don't see how your mind prefers what is familiar, even when it is not good for you. And because all of this remains hidden, your movement feels independent. It feels like it comes from you, but what you are experiencing is not complete freedom. It is guided movement without visible guidance. It is direction without awareness of direction. It is influence without recognition of influence. And this is where the illusion becomes strongest, because you are not being controlled in a way you can resist. You are being guided in a way you cannot see. The thought feels like yours. The desire feels like yours. The choice feels like yours. But beneath all of that, there are subtle forces shaping everything. Past impressions leaning your attention in certain directions. Emotions quietly narrowing what feels possible. Habits guiding you toward what feels comfortable. Beliefs filtering what you accept as true. All of this is happening continuously. And because it is not visible, you never question it. You only experience the result, and you call that result freedom. It is like walking through a path surrounded by invisible walls. You can move forward, you can turn left or right within that space, but you cannot see the boundaries that define your movement. So it feels like open space. It feels like limitless choice, but the path has already been shaped, and you are moving within it. This is why people often feel free, but still repeat the same patterns. They believe they are choosing differently, but they keep arriving at similar outcomes. Not because they lack effort, not because they lack intention, but because the unseen is still guiding them. The unseen does not need to control you directly. It only needs to shape what feels natural to you. And once something feels natural, you stop questioning it. You follow it without resistance. You move with it as if it were your own will. And this is how the illusion deepens. The more invisible the influence, the more real the freedom feels. The more hidden the guidance, the more personal the choice appears. But the Vedas do not take freedom away from you. They do something far more subtle. They show you that what you call freedom is incomplete, that it exists, but not in the way you think. Because true freedom cannot exist where there is no awareness. If you cannot see what is guiding you, you cannot truly be free from it. And this is where the shift begins. Not by trying to break the guidance, not by forcing control, but by slowly becoming aware of what was always there. The influences you never noticed, the patterns you never questioned, the directions you followed without seeing. And in that awareness, something quiet begins to change. The invisible starts to become visible. The unconscious begins to rise into your attention. And for the first time, what was guiding you silently no longer holds the same power, because you are beginning to see it. And once something is truly seen, it can no longer guide you in the same invisible way. What you can't see may still exist, but it no longer owns you the way it once did. And in that moment, freedom begins to feel different. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Because now, it is no longer built on what you cannot see. It is built on what you are finally beginning to understand. Desire pulls first. Choice only follows after. You often believe that you choose what you want. It feels simple. You look at something, you think about it, and then you decide, this is what I want. It feels like a clean movement, a clear moment where you stand in control. But if you slow down and watch more carefully, you will begin to notice something that changes everything. The wanting comes before the choosing. The desire appears first, not as a decision, not as something you created, but as a quiet pull inside you. Sometimes it is soft, almost unnoticeable, a slight attraction, a small preference, a gentle leaning. And sometimes it is strong, a sudden urge, a deep craving, a powerful movement that feels impossible to ignore. But in both cases, the pattern is the same. The desire comes first. You did not sit down and decide to want something. You did not carefully construct that feeling. It simply appeared. And once it appeared, your mind began to move around it. It started to justify it, to explain it, to make it feel logical. And then, a moment later, you said, I choose this. But what you are calling a choice is often just a response to something that already took hold inside you. Desire pulls, and you follow. And because the movement feels natural, smooth, effortless, you believe you are the one initiating it. But the Vedic insight gently turns your attention back to the beginning, not to the action, not to the decision, but to the moment before all of that. Where did the desire come from? Did you choose it, or did it arise on its own? If you are honest in your observation, you will see that desire does not ask you before it appears. It does not wait for your approval. It simply comes, and once it comes, it begins to shape everything that follows. It colors your thoughts. It narrows your attention. It makes certain options feel more attractive and others feel less important. And without realizing it, you begin moving in the direction it has already set. This is why desire is so powerful. Not because it forces you, but because it leads you before you are aware of being led. You feel like you are walking freely, but you are already being pulled. It is like a current beneath the surface of water. From above, everything looks calm. You feel like you are moving on your own, but underneath there is a flow guiding your direction. And unless you become aware of that flow, you will never question where you are being taken. This is why people often say, I don't know why I did that. Because the desire moved first, and the awareness came later. The mind followed the pull, created reasons, built a story around it, and called it a decision. But the decision was never the beginning. It was the final step, the last visible part of a movement that started much earlier. This does not mean you are powerless. It does not mean you cannot change. But it does mean that what you call choice is not as independent as it feels. Because as long as desire is moving unseen, your choices will continue to follow it. Quietly, naturally, without resistance. The deeper understanding is not about rejecting desire. It is about seeing it, seeing the moment it arises, feeling the pull without immediately becoming it, noticing how it shapes your thinking before you act on it. Because in that simple act of seeing, something shifts. The pull is still there, the movement is still there, but now you are aware of it. And that awareness creates a small space, a space where you are no longer completely carried by the desire. You begin to see the difference between what appears and what you do with it. And in that space, choice begins to take on a different meaning, not as something you create at the end, but as something that slowly becomes clearer as you watch the beginning. Desire may still come first, but it no longer moves completely unseen. And once it is seen, it no longer has the same silent control over you. It becomes just another movement, passing through you, not something that defines you. And from that quiet clarity, a different kind of action begins to emerge. Not rushed, not automatic, but aware. The ego speaks last, but claims it chose everything. There is a voice inside you that feels like the center of everything. It says, I did this. I chose this. This is my decision, my life, my path. It feels strong. It feels personal. It feels like the one thing you can trust without question, because it sounds like you. It feels like you, but if you begin to observe it, slowly, without trying to change anything, you will notice something subtle. This voice does not appear at the beginning. It appears at the end, after the thought has already formed, after the desire has already pulled, after the action has already begun. Then the voice comes in, quietly, confidently, and says, I chose this. It is like a narrator entering the story after it has already unfolded, and speaking as if it wrote the entire script. This is the nature of the ego. It does not create the movement. It explains it. It organizes it into a story that makes sense. It gives you a feeling of ownership over something that was already in motion. And because this explanation happens so smoothly, so naturally, so close to your sense of self, you do not question it. You accept it immediately. You believe it completely. But if you look more carefully, you will begin to see the timing. A thought appears. Then the voice says, I thought this. A feeling arises. Then the voice says, I feel this. An action happens. Then the voice says, I decided to do this. The claim always comes after the event, never before it. And yet, because the gap between the action and the claim is so small, it feels like one single movement. It feels like the same thing, but it is not. The movement happens first. The ownership comes later. This is why the ego feels so convincing. It does not argue with reality. It adjusts to it. It takes whatever has already happened and builds a story around it. A story where you are always in control. A story where everything makes sense. A story where nothing feels random or out of your hands. And this story becomes your identity. You begin to see yourself as the thinker of your thoughts, the chooser of your actions, the creator of your path. But the Vedic insight gently points to something deeper. What if you are not the one creating these movements? What if you are the one becoming aware of them? What if the voice that says, I chose this, is not the source, but just the final layer added on top? This does not mean the ego is wrong. It means it is incomplete. It shows you the surface, but not the depth. It gives you the final explanation, but not the hidden process. And because you only hear the explanation, you believe you understand the whole movement, but you don't see what came before it. You don't see how the thought formed. You don't see how the desire pulled. You don't see how the pattern repeated itself again. You only hear the voice at the end, claiming everything as its own. It is like watching a wave reach the shore and believing that is where the ocean began. You are seeing the final moment, not the long movement that brought it there. And as long as you only listen to this voice, you will continue to feel like the center of control, because the story will always place you there. It will always say, you did this. You chose this. This is yours. Oh, but the moment you begin to watch more carefully, something shifts. You begin to see the gap. You begin to notice that the thought comes before the claim. The feeling comes before the ownership. The action comes before the explanation. And in that seeing, the voice loses some of its authority, not because it disappears, but because you understand its place. It is no longer the source. It is just the narrator. And once you see that clearly, a quiet freedom begins to appear. You are no longer fully identified with the story. You are no longer completely convinced by the claim. You begin to sense that there is something deeper than the voice, something that is aware of it, watching it, not controlled by it. And in that awareness, the illusion of complete control begins to soften, not violently, not suddenly, but gently, silently, like a story you once believed that slowly begins to lose its hold over you. The ego may still speak. It may still claim. It may still say, I chose everything. But now, you are no longer fully inside that claim. You are watching it. And that changes everything. What feels like you is just a pattern repeating itself. There are parts of you that feel unquestionable. The way you think, the way you react, the things you like, the things you avoid. It all feels deeply personal. It feels like this is simply who you are. And because it feels so natural, so familiar, you stop looking any further. You accept it. You live through it. You build your life around it. But if you slow down and begin to watch these movements more carefully, a quiet realization begins to form. What feels like you is often something you have repeated many times before, not something you consciously created, not something you chose in a clear moment, but something that formed slowly through repetition, a reaction that happened once, then again, until it became your usual response, a thought that appeared many times, until it felt like your own voice, a way of seeing the world that shaped itself through experience, until it became your normal. And once something becomes normal, you stop questioning it. You stop observing it. You stop seeing it as a pattern. You begin to see it as yourself. This is how identity quietly forms, not through a single decision, but through repeated movements that slowly become invisible. You say, this is just how I am, but what you are often describing is a pattern that has been practiced so many times that it feels natural. And the more natural it feels, the more real it becomes. It is like walking the same path every day. At first, you notice the steps. You are aware of where you are going. But after a while, the path becomes automatic. You no longer think about it. Your body follows it without effort. Your mind does not question it. And eventually, you forget that you ever chose to walk that path at all. In the same way, your thoughts, your reactions, your habits have become paths inside you. Paths formed by repetition. Paths strengthened by familiarity. Paths that feel so close to you that you call them me. But the Vedas quietly suggest something deeper. What you are calling me may simply be a collection of repeated patterns, not false, not meaningless, but not as fixed as you believe. Because anything that is formed through repetition can be seen, and anything that can be seen is not truly you. It is something happening within you. This is why certain behaviors feel so hard to change, not because they are your true nature, But because they have been repeated so often that they feel like your nature, the pattern continues, not because it is necessary, but because it is familiar. And familiarity creates comfort. Even when that comfort leads to the same outcomes again and again, you return to the same thoughts, the same emotional reactions, the same ways of responding to life. And each time you do, the pattern becomes stronger, not through force, but through quiet reinforcement. And because it feels so natural, you don't see it as repetition. You see it as identity. But the moment you begin to observe these patterns, without trying to change them, without judging them, without pushing them away, something shifts. You begin to see the repetition. You begin to notice how the same thoughts appear in different situations, how the same reactions arise even when the moment is new, how the same feelings return, shaped slightly differently, but carrying the same core. And in that seeing, a small distance appears. You are no longer completely inside the pattern. You are aware of it, and that awareness changes everything. Because once you see that what feels like you is actually something repeating, it no longer holds the same authority. It no longer feels fixed. It no longer feels unchangeable. It becomes something you can observe, something you can understand, something that is happening rather than something you are. This does not mean the pattern disappears immediately. It may continue for some time. It may still feel strong. It may still pull you into familiar ways of thinking and acting. But now, there is a quiet knowing beneath it, a knowing that says, this is not all that I am. This is something I have been repeating. And in that knowing, the pattern begins to loosen, slowly, silently, without force, because what is clearly seen cannot continue in the same unconscious way. What once felt like your entire identity begins to reveal itself as something much simpler. A movement, a beat, a repetition, and you are the one who is finally seeing it. The less you question, the deeper the illusion takes hold. There is a quiet habit that most people never notice. You believe your thoughts. Not sometimes, almost always. A thought appears, and you accept it without pause. It feels true because it is familiar. It feels right because it is yours. And because it comes from within you, you do not stop to question it. You move with it. You build your next step on top of it. And without realizing it, your entire experience begins to follow something you never examined. This is how the illusion deepens, not through force, not through control, but through silent agreement. Every time a thought appears and you do not question it, you give it strength. Every time a reaction arises and you follow it automatically, you make the pattern deeper. Every time something feels true and you do not look beyond that feeling, you move further into the illusion. It is not something that happens once. It happens again and again, in small moments, in simple decisions, in everyday thinking. And because it is so ordinary, you never see it as something important. You simply call it life. But the Vedic insight asks you to look more closely, not at what you are doing, but at how you are moving through it. A thought comes, and you follow it. Another thought comes, and you follow that too. There is no pause, no space, no moment where you ask, is this actually true, or is this just familiar? And because there is no pause, everything continues in the same direction. The mind repeats what it knows. The past shapes what you feel. Desire pulls you forward, and you move through all of it without seeing the process. You only feel the result, and the result feels real. It feels like your life, your choices, your identity. But beneath that surface, something is repeating itself quietly, and the less you question it, the more it becomes your reality. It is like walking in a dream. While you are inside it, everything feels normal. Everything makes sense. You do not question the direction, the events, the logic. You simply move through it. But the moment you begin to question the dream, something shifts. The certainty begins to weaken. The structure begins to feel less solid, and the illusion starts to reveal itself. In the same way, your everyday thinking becomes stronger the less you question it. You believe your fears because they feel real. You believe your desires because they feel natural. You believe your judgments because they feel obvious. And slowly, without noticing, these beliefs shape everything. They decide what you see. They decide how you respond. They decide what feels possible and what feels impossible. And because you never question them, they remain unchallenged, unseen, unbroken. This is how the illusion holds its power, not by hiding from you completely, but by blending so closely with your experience that you stop looking at it. It becomes your normal, your default, your truth. But the moment you begin to question, not aggressively, not with force, but gently, quietly, everything begins to change. You start to notice the thought instead of immediately believing it. You start to feel the reaction instead of becoming it. You begin to see the pattern instead of being fully inside it. And in that simple shift, the illusion loses some of its depth. It begins to loosen, not because you are fighting it, but because you are seeing it. Questioning does not destroy your thoughts. It reveals them. It shows you that what feels absolute is often just repeated. What feels certain is often just familiar. And what feels like truth is often just something you have never examined. The less you question, the more everything feels fixed. The more you question, the more everything begins to open. Not into confusion, but into clarity. Because now you are no longer moving blindly. You are beginning to see where each movement begins. And once you see that clearly, the illusion can no longer hold you in the same way. It may still exist. The thoughts may still come. The patterns may still appear, but they no longer feel as solid. They no longer feel as final, because you are no longer accepting them without seeing them. And that is where the illusion begins to lose its hold. Not in a loud moment, not in a sudden break, but in a quiet shift, where you stop following everything automatically and begin to look. And in that looking, something deeper begins to awaken. Something that is not caught in the illusion, but is finally starting to see it. Everything changes. The moment you stop and simply watch. There is a habit you have lived with for so long that it feels natural. A thought appears, and you follow it. A feeling rises, and you become it. A reaction begins, and you complete it without even noticing. There is no gap, no space between what appears and what you do. Everything happens in one continuous movement, so fast, so smooth, that it feels like one single thing. This is how most of life is lived, not through awareness, but through automatic continuation. And because it is automatic, it feels effortless. It feels normal. It feels like this is simply how things are. But the Vedic insight points to something very quiet, very simple, something that does not require effort, control, or force. It simply asks you to stop for a moment and watch, not to change anything, not to resist anything, not to improve anything, just to watch. A thought appears, and instead of stepping into it, you notice it. You see its shape, you feel its movement, you observe how it begins, how it tries to pull your attention, how it invites you to follow it. But you do not move with it immediately. You remain where you are, watching. A feeling arises, and instead of becoming lost in it, you feel it without becoming it. You sense its presence, its weight, its texture, but you do not rush to react. You stay with it, and in that simple act, something begins to change. Not outside you, inside you. The chain that was once continuous begins to break, not completely, not suddenly, but enough for you to see that it was there. You begin to notice that a thought is just a thought. A feeling is just a feeling. A reaction is just a movement. They are not commands. They are not absolute. They are not something you must follow. They are simply appearing and passing. This is something most people never see, because they are always inside the movement. They are always reacting before they are aware. So the process continues without interruption. But the moment you watch, the process is no longer hidden. You begin to see the beginning of a thought. You begin to feel the moment a reaction starts to form. You begin to notice the subtle pull before it takes over. And in that moment of seeing, you are no longer fully inside it. You are outside it, just enough to understand it. This is where everything begins to change. Not because you controlled anything, not because you forced anything to stop, but because you saw it clearly. It is like stepping back from a fast-moving river. When you are inside it, you are carried without choice. The current decides your direction, but the moment you step out and watch it from the shore, you see the flow. You see how it moves. You see where it leads. And that seeing changes your relationship with it. In the same way, when you watch your thoughts and reactions, you are no longer completely carried by them. You begin to understand them. And understanding creates space. A space where you are not forced to react. A space where you can simply observe. This space is small at first, almost unnoticeable, but it is powerful, because in that space, you are no longer acting blindly. You are aware, and awareness has a quiet strength. It does not push. It does not resist. It simply sees, and in seeing, it loosens the grip of everything that once felt automatic. The thought may still come. The feeling may still rise. The reaction may still begin. But now, there is a difference. You are not completely lost in it. You are watching it unfold, and that changes everything, because what is seen clearly cannot control you in the same way. It may still appear. It may still try to pull you, but it no longer moves through you without your awareness. And over time, this simple act of watching begins to deepen. The gap becomes clearer. The awareness becomes steadier. The automatic patterns begin to weaken, not through effort, but through understanding. And slowly, very slowly, your life begins to shift, not because you forced it to change, but because you stopped moving blindly within it. You paused, you watched, and in that quiet watching, you finally began to see what was always happening beneath the surface. And once you see it, everything begins to feel different. Not louder, not more intense, but clearer, more open, more real. Because now, you are no longer just living the movement. You are aware of it. And that awareness is where true change begins. Control was never yours. Awareness is where it begins. For a long time, it feels like control is the answer. If you could just control your thoughts, control your reactions, control your emotions, everything would finally fall into place. You would stop making the same mistakes. You would stop repeating the same patterns. You would finally become the person you believe you should be. So you try. You try to manage your thoughts. You try to push away what feels wrong. You try to hold on to what feels right. You try to force your mind into a direction that feels better. And for a moment, it seems like it works. There is a sense of effort, a sense of movement, a feeling that you are doing something. But beneath that effort, something remains unchanged. The thoughts still come. The reactions still arise. The patterns still return. Because control is happening at the surface, while the real movement is happening much deeper. You are trying to adjust the result without seeing the process that created it. And this is where the quiet realization begins. Control was never truly yours, not in the way you imagined, not as something you could use to shape every thought and every feeling exactly as you want. Because if you look closely, you do not choose your next thought before it appears. You do not decide your next feeling before it rises. You do not control the first movement of your reaction. All of this begins on its own. And then, a moment later, you try to control it. You try to guide it. You try to correct it. But by then, the movement has already started. So control becomes a constant effort to adjust what is already happening. It becomes a struggle at the surface of something much deeper. And this is why it feels exhausting. Because you are trying to hold on to something that was never fully in your hands. The Vedic insight does not ask you to try harder. It does not tell you to become better at control. It gently shows you something else. Something far more subtle and far more powerful. Awareness, not control, not force, not resistance. Just awareness, to see what is happening as it is happening. To notice the thought as it appears. To feel the reaction as it begins. To observe the pattern as it unfolds. Without trying to stop it. Without trying to change it. Without trying to push it in another direction. At first, this may feel strange. It may feel like you are doing nothing. It may feel like you are losing control. But what is really happening is something deeper. You are stepping out of the struggle. You are no longer trying to control the movement blindly. You are beginning to see it clearly. And in that seeing, something shifts. Because awareness does what control cannot. Control tries to change the surface. Awareness reveals the root. When you see how a thought forms, it no longer feels as solid. When you see how a reaction begins, it no longer feels as automatic. When you see how a pattern repeats, it no longer feels as fixed. This does not happen instantly. It unfolds slowly, quietly, without force. But over time, awareness begins to change the quality of your experience. You are no longer constantly reacting. You are no longer lost in every thought that appears. You are no longer trying to control something that keeps slipping away. Instead, you are watching. You are understanding. You are present with what is happening. And from that presence, a different kind of movement begins to emerge. Not forced, not controlled, but natural. Because now, your actions are no longer coming from blind repetition. They are coming from clarity. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to move with understanding instead of habit. You begin to act with awareness instead of impulse. And this is where something deeper begins. Not control over life, but freedom within it. Because you are no longer trying to dominate what is happening. You are no longer fighting the flow. You are seeing the flow. And in seeing it, you are no longer completely carried by it. Control was never the key. It was always limited, always incomplete. But awareness, quiet, simple, steady awareness, is where everything truly begins to change. Not by force, not by effort, but by light. The light of seeing clearly. And once something is clearly seen, it can never return to being completely unseen again. And that is where the real shift begins. Not in control, but in awareness. Freedom is not in choosing better, but in seeing clearly. Most people spend their lives trying to choose better. Better decisions, better habits, better responses. They believe that if they can just think more carefully, act more wisely, control themselves more strongly, everything will finally change. And on the surface, this seems true. Sometimes a better choice does lead to a better result. Sometimes a different action creates a different outcome. But beneath all of that, something remains the same. The same patterns return. The same thoughts reappear. The same inner movement continues quietly. Because even your better choices are often coming from the same place. The same mind, the same past, the same unseen patterns guiding you. So even when you try to improve, you are still moving within the same structure. You are rearranging the surface without seeing the deeper movement that creates it. This is why change feels temporary. You make progress, and then something pulls you back. You move forward, and then find yourself repeating something familiar again. Not because you failed, but because the root was never seen. The Vedic insight does not focus on choosing better. It moves in a different direction. It asks you to see more clearly. Because without clear seeing, every choice, no matter how good it appears, is still influenced by what you do not understand. You may choose differently, but the hidden patterns are still there, quietly shaping your direction. But the moment you begin to see clearly, something begins to shift at a deeper level. You start to notice how a thought forms. You begin to see how a desire pulls you. You recognize how a reaction begins before you are even aware of it. And in that seeing, the patterns start to lose their silent power. Not because you are forcing them to stop, but because you are no longer completely inside them. Clarity does not fight the pattern. It exposes it. It brings it into the light. And once something is clearly seen, it can no longer move in the same unconscious way. This is why true freedom is not in choosing better. Because as long as you are choosing from the same unseen patterns, you are still within the same cycle. It may look different on the outside, but inside, the movement is the same. True freedom begins when you are no longer blind to what is shaping your choices. When you can see the pattern before it fully takes over. When you can feel the pull without immediately following it. When you can notice the thought without becoming it. This does not mean you stop choosing. It means your choices begin to come from a different place. Not from habit, not from repetition, not from unconscious movement, but from awareness, from clarity. And clarity is quiet. It does not rush. It does not force. It simply sees what is there, without adding anything, without taking anything away. And from that simple seeing, a new kind of action begins to emerge. An action that is not driven by the past, An action that is not pulled blindly by desire. An action that is not claimed by the ego after it happens, but an action that comes from understanding. This kind of action feels different. It is not heavy. It is not forced. It is not confused. It is natural because it is not trying to escape the pattern. It is moving beyond it. And this is where freedom begins to feel real, not as the ability to choose anything you want, but as the ability to see clearly what is happening within you. Because when you see clearly, you are no longer completely controlled by what you do not understand. You are no longer trapped in movements you cannot see. You are present, aware, not separate from life, but not lost inside it either. And from that place, your choices begin to carry a different quality. They are not reactions. They are not repetitions. They are expressions of clarity. And that is what freedom truly is. Not endless choice, but clear seeing. Because once you can see clearly, everything else begins to change on its own. The moment you truly see, the cycle quietly starts to break. There is no loud ending to this. No sudden moment where everything disappears and you become completely different overnight. The change that comes from seeing is not dramatic. It is quiet, almost unnoticeable at first, but it is real. For a long time, everything has been moving in a cycle. A thought appears. You follow it. A feeling rises. You become it. A pattern begins, and it completes itself again. This has been happening again and again, so smoothly that it feels like life itself. But now, something small begins to shift. You are no longer completely inside the movement. You are starting to see it, not as an idea, not as something you were told, but directly in your own experience. A thought appears, and you notice it before it pulls you completely. A feeling rises, and you sense it without immediately reacting. A familiar pattern begins, and for the first time, you recognize it as it unfolds. This recognition is quiet. There is no effort in it, no force, just a simple clarity. And in that clarity, something changes. The cycle does not stop instantly. It may continue. The thoughts may still come. The reactions may still happen, but they no longer move through you in the same way. Because now, there is awareness present. And awareness changes the nature of everything it touches. What was once automatic begins to slow down. What was once invisible begins to become clear. What once felt like, this is just how I am, begins to feel like, this is something happening. And that difference is everything. Because when something is seen as a movement, it is no longer your identity. It is no longer something you are completely lost in. It is something you are observing. And what is observed cannot control you in the same way. At first, the change is small. A single moment where you pause. A single thought you do not follow. A single reaction that does not fully take over. It may seem insignificant, but it is not. Because in that moment, the cycle did not complete itself. And once a cycle begins to break, even slightly, it cannot continue with the same strength. Each time you see clearly, the pattern weakens a little more, not because you are trying to weaken it, but because it is no longer moving in darkness. It is no longer hidden. It is being seen, and what is seen loses its unconscious power. Over time, this seeing becomes more natural. You begin to recognize patterns earlier. You begin to feel the pull before it becomes strong. You begin to sense the movement before it fully forms. And slowly, very slowly, and the cycles that once defined your life begin to lose their hold. Not completely, not all at once, but steadily, silently, without effort. There is no need to fight, no need to force change, because the change is already happening through awareness. You are no longer feeding the pattern blindly. You are no longer strengthening it through unconscious repetition. You are simply seeing it, and that is enough. This is the part most people never reach, because they are always trying to fix something, trying to control something, trying to become something else. But the deeper truth is simpler. Nothing needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be pushed away. Everything only needs to be seen clearly. And once it is seen, it begins to change on its own. The cycle does not break through effort. It breaks through understanding, through awareness, through quiet observation. And in that space, something new begins to emerge. Not a new identity, not a new pattern, but a different way of being. A way that is not driven by repetition, not controlled by unseen forces, not shaped by unconscious movement, but grounded in clarity, present, still, free in a way that does not need to prove itself. You may still feel like you are choosing. That feeling may never fully disappear, but now there is something deeper beneath it, a knowing, a quiet awareness that sees everything as it unfolds. And in that awareness, you are no longer trapped inside the cycle. You are watching it, understanding it, and slowly, without force, moving beyond it. Not because you tried to escape, but because you finally saw it clearly. And once something is truly seen, it can never return to being completely unseen again. And that is where the cycle begins to end. Not loudly, not suddenly, but quietly, completely. It still feels like you're choosing. That feeling doesn't disappear. You will still wake up, think, decide, move, just like before. From the outside, nothing dramatic changes, but something inside you is no longer the same. There is now a quiet distance between you and everything that once controlled you without being seen. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer carry the same authority. Desires still rise, but they no longer pull you without awareness. Patterns still begin, but they no longer complete themselves in darkness, because now there is something present that was not there before. You are seeing, not forcing, not controlling, just seeing, and that changes everything. Not in a loud way, not in a way the world will notice immediately, but in a way that slowly reshapes your entire experience from within. You are no longer blindly following every movement that passes through you. You are no longer lost inside every thought that appears. You are no longer the one being carried without knowing where you are going. You are aware of the movement, and in that awareness, something powerful begins. A freedom that does not come from controlling life, but from no longer being unconsciously controlled by it. A freedom that is quiet, steady, unshaken. You don't need to fight the mind anymore. You don't need to force change. You don't need to become something else, because the moment you truly see, the old way begins to fall away on its own, and what remains is simple, clear, present, alive. You may still feel like you're choosing, but now you know something deeper. The real shift was never in the choice. It was in the seeing. And once you begin to see, you don't go back to sleep the same way again. Something stays awake within you, watching, understanding, free.